The moment my mother looked directly at me across the Christmas dinner table, surrounded by my 3 siblings and their families, and said, "You're the most useless child we have." The entire room went silent. Uncle Frank stopped cutting his turkey. My sister Jessica's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Even the children stopped chattering. 22 people stared at me, waiting for my reaction. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and said, "Then stop calling me when you need money." Her face went white. Everyone stopped breathing. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, but it probably only lasted 3 seconds. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, could hear little cousin Emma's juice box making that annoying sucking sound when it's empty. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She clearly hadn't expected me to respond, let alone respond with something that cut so deep. I remained standing, my hands pressed flat against the mahogany dining table that had been in our family for generations. The same table where I'd done homework as a kid, where I'd announced my acceptance to college, where I'd brought Sarah for the first time last year. Now it felt like a courtroom, and I was both the accused and the prosecutor. "Brown, sit down," my father said quietly, his voice carrying that warning tone I'd heard throughout my childhood. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was 28 years old, a senior software engineer at a tech company in Boston, and I owned my own condo. More importantly, I was tired of being treated like the family failure when I was the one keeping this family financially afloat. "No, Dad. I think everyone here deserves to know the truth," I said, looking around the table at faces that ranged from confused to uncomfortable to downright shocked. "Since Mom thinks him so useless, maybe she should explain to everyone how many times this useless son has bailed out this family." My mother's face had gone from white to red now. She was gripping her cloth napkin so tightly her knuckles were white. "Brown, this is not the time or place." "When is the time, Mom?" I interrupted. Something I'd never done before in my life. "When you call me crying about another emergency? When you guilt-trip me about family loyalty? When is it ever the right time to talk about the $53,000 I've given this family over the past 4 years? The number hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. I heard Aunt Patricia's sharp intake of breath. Uncle Frank set down his knife and fork completely. Jessica's eyes went wide, and I realized she had no idea about the money. None of them did except my parents, and apparently my brother Marcus, who was suddenly very interested in the pattern on his plate. $53,000, I repeated, my voice getting stronger. "That's not counting the small stuff, just the big emergencies. Should I break it down for everyone?" "Brown, please," my father said, but there was something different in his voice now. Shame, maybe, or resignation. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and started reading from my transaction history. October 2021, emergency transfer to Mom, $8,000. Your story was that the roof was leaking and you needed immediate repairs before winter. I found out later from Jessica that you had the roof fixed for $3,000. Jessica's face went pale. "Wait, what? Mom, you told me Dad's insurance covered the roof." November 2021, $7,000 for Dad's emergency room visit when he had chest pains, except his insurance covered 80%, and the actual bill was $2,000. My father looked up sharply. "Son, I never asked you to." "I know you didn't, Dad. Mom called me sobbing, said you were too proud to ask for help, said we might lose the house if we couldn't pay the medical bills immediately." I turned to my mother, who was now staring at her plate. Should I continue? Because I've got 3 more years of this. The dining room felt like it was shrinking. Sarah, my girlfriend of 2 years, was sitting next to me, and I could feel her supportive presence, even though she hadn't said a word. She'd witnessed some of these phone calls from my mother, had seen how they always left me feeling guilty and stressed. January 2022, $12,000 for Jessica's divorce lawyer, I continued. Mom said Jessica was getting taken to the cleaners and needed the best representation money could buy. Jessica dropped her fork with a clatter. "Brown, I never asked for that. I thought Mom and Dad took out a loan." March 2022, $5,000 for Marcus DUI lawyer and court fees. Marcus finally looked up, his face red with embarrassment. "Man, I'm sorry. I thought Dad paid for that from his retirement fund." Dad's retirement fund, I said with a bitter laugh. You mean the retirement fund that was depleted 2 years ago? The one I've been supplementing with monthly transfers so Dad can actually retire instead of working at the hardware store until he dies. The room erupted. Multiple conversations started at once. Aunt Patricia was demanding to know why she hadn't been told about any financial problems. Uncle Frank was asking Dad if this was why he'd been looking so tired lately. Cousin Danny was looking at his parents with questions in his eyes. The kids sensed the adult tension and started getting restless. But my mother just sat there, her perfectly applied makeup starting to smudge as tears formed in her eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The best part, I said, and my voice cracked slightly, is that every single time Mom calls me with these emergencies, she starts the conversation the same way. Brown, I hate to ask, but you're the only one who's really made something of yourself. You're the successful one. We're so proud of you. And then she spends the next 20 minutes explaining why I owe it to the family to help out. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. But apparently, when I'm not immediately available to write a check, I'm the most useless child you have. Grandmother Rose, who'd been visiting from Florida and had been quietly observing this entire exchange, set down her coffee cup with enough force to make it clink against the saucer. At 86 years old, she commanded respect from everyone in the room. Margaret, she said, using my mother's full name in a tone that brooked no argument. Is what Brown is saying true? The question hung in the air, and I realized this was the moment everything would change. Either my mother would come clean, or Shed doubled down on her manipulation. Either way, the family dynamics that had controlled my life for years were about to shift forever. My mother looked around the table at faces that were no longer sympathetic, no longer willing to automatically take her side. For the first time in my adult life, she was going to have to tell the truth. My mother's mouth opened and closed several more times before any words came out. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and defensive, nothing like the confident, martyred tone she used during our phone calls. I don't know where Brown is getting these numbers, she began, but Uncle Frank cut her off. Margaret, the boy is reading from his bank statements. Are you calling him a liar? The directness of the question seemed to startle her. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of the extended family. For years, Shed controlled the narrative about our family's finances, playing the role of the struggling mother who sacrificed everything for her children. It's not that simple, she said, her voice getting stronger as she found her footing. Yes, Brown has helped us out, but that's what families do. We helped him through college. You didn't help me through college, Mom, I interrupted. I had student loans and worked 3 jobs. You co-signed for the loans, but I've been paying them myself since graduation, plus interest. Jessica was shaking her head slowly. Mom, this doesn't make sense. You always told us that Brown was doing well, but that he was selfish with money. You said he never helped the family. When did I say that? My mother demanded. Last Christmas, Tyler, my youngest brother, spoke up quietly. At 24, he was usually the peacekeeper in family conflicts. You said Brown thought he was too good for the family now that he had his fancy job. You said he'd forgotten where he came from. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my mother was telling my siblings that I was selfish and had abandoned the family, she was simultaneously calling me every month, asking for money. Shed created 2 completely different narratives, depending on her audience. I think, said Grandmother Rose in her measured way, that we need to understand exactly what's been happening in this family. Margaret, where has all this money gone? If Brown has given you over $50,000 in 4 years, plus monthly supplements to Robert's retirement fund, where is it? My father finally looked up from his plate. His face was haggard, and for the first time, I noticed how much older he looked. The stress of whatever had been happening had aged him. Rose, I think there are some things Margaret needs to tell the family, he said quietly. The way he said it made my blood run cold. There was something else, something bigger than just the financial manipulation. I could see it in his posture, in the way he couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Robert, my mother said sharply, this is not the time. When is the time, Margaret? He asked, echoing my earlier words. When we lose the house? When I have to tell your mother that her daughter has a gambling problem? The words hit the table like a bomb. gambling problem. Suddenly, everything made sense. The emergency repairs that cost twice what they should have. The medical bills that were mysteriously higher than insurance covered. The constant financial crises that never seemed to get resolved no matter how much money was thrown at them. "Dad," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about?" My father looked at my mother, giving her one last chance to tell the truth herself. When she remained silent, her jaw set in stubborn defiance. He sighed deeply. "Your mother has been gambling at Mohegan Sun Casino for the past 3 years. What started as occasional trips with her book club turned into 2 or 3 times a week. She's lost our savings, our emergency fund, and most of the money Brown has been sending us." The table erupted again, but this time the shock was deeper, more profound. Aunt Patricia actually stood up from her chair. Uncle Frank was staring at my mother like he'd never seen her before. Marcus was running his hands through his hair repeatedly, a nervous habit Head had since childhood. "That's not true," my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've had some bad luck, yes, but it's not a problem. I'm not addicted to anything." "Mom," I said, and my voice was surprisingly gentle. "Last month you called me crying because you said the water heater had broken and flooded the basement. You needed $3,000 immediately for emergency repairs and water damage." "It did break," she said defensively. "I drove down here the next weekend to help with the cleanup," I continued. "The basement was fine. The water heater was running perfectly. When I asked about it, you said the repair guy had fixed it faster than expected, and the damage wasn't as bad as you thought." Sarah finally spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Henderson, I was with Brown when he got that phone call. You were crying so hard he could barely understand you. He was terrified that his childhood home was being destroyed. He transferred the money that same night without hesitation because he loves this family." The simple statement of fact hit harder than any accusation could have, because it was true. Despite everything, despite the manipulation and the guilt trips and the constant financial demands, I did love my family. That's what made the betrayal hurt so much. "How much?" Grandmother Rose asked quietly. "How much what?" my mother replied. "How much have you lost gambling? How much of Brown's money went to the casino instead of the emergencies you described?" The question hung in the air. I found myself holding my breath, not sure I wanted to know the answer. "I don't keep track like that," my mother said evasively. "I do," my father said. "I've been tracking it since I found out. $47,000, Rose. Of the $53,000 Brown has given us, $47,000 has gone to the casino." The number was staggering. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 4 years of emergency phone calls. 4 years of guilt trips about family loyalty. 4 years of believing I was helping keep my family stable and secure. Instead, it'd been funding an addiction that was destroying everything I thought I was protecting. "Jesus Christ, Mom," Tyler said, his voice shaking with anger. "Brown has been working his ass off to help us, and you've been throwing it away on slot machines. It's not that simple," she said again, but the fight was going out of her voice. "Sometimes I win. Sometimes I win big. If I could just get ahead, I could pay everything back." "That's what every gambler says," Uncle Frank said grimly. "Margaret, this is insane. How could you do this to your own son?" For the first time since this whole confrontation started, my mother looked directly at me. Her makeup was definitely smudged now, and there were tears running down her cheeks. But instead of the remorse I was hoping to see, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. I saw resentment. "Brown makes more money in a month than most people make in 6 months, she said, her voice gaining strength again. "He lives in a fancy condo, drives a new car, takes expensive vacations with her." She gestured dismissively at Sarah. "What's a few $1,000s to him? He doesn't even miss it." The selfishness of this statement was breathtaking. She wasn't sorry about the lying or the manipulation. She was just sorry she'd been caught. "A few $1,000s, I repeated. "Mom, it's been my entire savings. Every penny I had set aside for a down payment on a house, gone. The ring I'd been saving to buy for Sarah, gone. I've been living paycheck to paycheck so you could feed your addiction." Sarah's hand found mine under the table. She'd known about the delayed proposal plans, had been patiently waiting while I dealt with what I thought were legitimate family emergencies. Now she knew why our future had been put on hold. Furthermore, Jessica said, and her voice was ice cold, you made the rest of us think Brown didn't care about the family. You poisoned our relationship with our brother to cover up your own problems. That's not what I was trying to do, my mother protested. Then what were you trying to do? Marcus demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you systematically manipulated Brown for money, while simultaneously destroying his relationships with the rest of us. So he'd feel isolated and guilty enough to keep paying. The accusation was harsh, but as soon as Marcus said it, I realized he was right. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Every time I'd start to question one of her emergency requests, Shed mentioned something about how disappointed the family was in me, how everyone thought I'd gotten too big for my britches, how I was the only one who could help because I was the only successful one. Shed played both sides expertly, keeping me isolated from my siblings so I couldn't compare notes or ask questions. Shed made me feel like the family's savior and its greatest disappointment simultaneously. I think, said Grandmother Rose, standing up slowly, that this conversation has gone on long enough for now. Margaret, you clearly have some serious problems that need professional help. Robert, you should have told me about this situation months ago. She walked around the table to where I was sitting and placed her hand on my shoulder. Brown, I owe you an apology. We all do. What you've done for this family out of love and loyalty has been taken advantage of in the worst possible way. The simple acknowledgement broke something loose in my chest. For 4 years, I'd questioned myself constantly. Was I doing enough? Should I give more? Was I being selfish when I hesitated before writing another check? Now, for the first time, someone was telling me that I'd been taken advantage of, that my doubts and frustrations were valid. But I could tell from my mother's expression that she wasn't done fighting. The resentment I'd seen earlier was growing stronger, and I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone wince. Her face had gone through several color changes during this conversation, but now it was settling into something I'd never seen before. Pure, undisguised anger. I can't believe this, she said, her voice rising. I can't believe my own son would humiliate me like this in front of the entire family. Everything I've done for this family. Every sacrifice I've made has been for my children. What sacrifices, Mom? Tyler asked, his voice tired. What sacrifices have you made? Because from what I'm hearing, the only person making sacrifices has been Brown. I gave up my career to raise you children, she snapped. I could have been a successful businesswoman, but I chose to stay home and take care of my family. And this is the thanks I get. The statement was so divorced from reality that several people around the table actually scoffed. My mother hadn't had a job in over 15 years, not since Tyler started high school. She'd been claiming to run a catering business, but had never seen any evidence of actual clients or income. Margaret, Uncle Frank said. What career? What business are you talking about? My catering business, she said defiantly. I've been building it for years, and it's finally starting to take off. That's where some of the money has been going, into business expenses. What catering business? Jessica asked. Mom, I've never seen you cater anything. I didn't even know you were claiming to have a business. The lie was unraveling in real time. I pulled out my phone again and opened my email. Mom, do you want me to read the email you sent me last month? The one where you said you'd lost your biggest catering client and needed money to cover the kitchen rental fees. Her face went white again. Brown, don't you dare. The email where you said you'd been forced to close the business temporarily because of equipment problems? Or should I read the one from 6 months ago where you said the catering business was doing so well that you were thinking of expanding? Those emails are private, she said desperately. Those emails are lies, I said flatly. Just like the broken water heater. Just like the emergency roof repairs. Just like Dad's inflated medical bills. It's all been lies to get money for gambling. Aunt Patricia had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Margaret, Robert, I need to know something. Last year when you borrowed $15,000 from Frank and me, what did you tell us it was for? Uncle Frank looked surprised. I thought that money was for Tyler's college tuition. It was, my mother said quickly. Tyler needed. No, it wasn't. Tyler interrupted. My college is paid for by scholarships and student loans. I never asked for any money for tuition. The web of lies was getting so tangled that my mother couldn't keep track of her own stories anymore. But instead of admitting defeat, she seemed to be getting angrier, more desperate. Fine, she said, her voice getting shrill. Fine. Maybe I have a small gambling problem. Maybe I made some mistakes. But that doesn't give Brown the right to embarrass me like this in front of everyone. A real son would handle this privately. A real son would be supportive and understanding. The manipulation was so blatant that it was almost impressive, even caught in outright lies, even exposed as having stolen tens of thousands of dollars from her own son. She was still trying to make me the villain. A real mother, Sarah said quietly, wouldn't have lied to her son for 4 years and stolen his future. My mother whirled on Sarah with a viciousness that took everyone by surprise. You don't get to speak here. You're not family. You're just some girl who's been hanging around hoping to get her hands on Brown's money. The attack on Sarah was the last straw for me. Attacking me was one thing, but going after the woman I loved, the woman who'd supported me through every single one of these family crises, was unforgivable. I stood up again. And this time my voice was ice cold. Mom, you're going to apologize to Sarah right now, or I'm leaving, and you'll never see me again. I'm not apologizing for telling the truth, she said stubbornly. The truth? I laughed bitterly. You want to talk about truth? Jessica, do you still have your phone recording app? Jessica's eyes went wide. Brown, what are you talking about? Show them the recordings, Jess. Show them what Mom really thinks of her useless son. The color drained from my mother's face so completely that I thought she might faint. Jessica doesn't have any recordings. Yes, she does, I said, because Jessica has been suspicious of these emergency phone calls for months. She's been recording your conversations, Mom. She's been trying to figure out why nothing you said ever added up. Jessica fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking slightly. Brown, I wasn't sure if I should. Play it, I said firmly. Let everyone hear what she really thinks about the son who's been supporting her gambling habit. The room fell silent as Jessica found the right file and pressed play. My mother's voice came through the phone's speaker, tinny but perfectly clear. The thing is, Linda, my mother's recorded voice said, Brown is such an easy target, has so desperate for approval, so guilty about having money when the rest of the family struggles. All I have to do is cry a little and mention family loyalty, and he opens his wallet. There was another woman's voice on the recording. Presumably my mother's friend Linda. Don't you feel bad about lying to him? Feel bad. My mother's laugh was cruel. Linda. He makes more money than he knows what to do with. Hez just sitting there in his fancy condo, hoarding it all while his family suffers. I'm doing him a favor by giving him opportunities to help. Besides, it's not like he's ever going to get married and have kids of his own. Sarah's just using him for his money anyway. The recording continued, but it hurt enough. The casual cruelty of it, the complete lack of remorse or affection, was devastating. This was how she really saw me. Not as her son, but as a resource to be exploited. How could you? Tyler asked, his voice breaking. Mom, how could you say things like that about Brown? Has been supporting all of us. But my mother wasn't looking at Tyler. She was staring at Jessica with an expression of pure rage. You recorded me? You recorded private conversations with my friends. I recorded you because nothing you said made sense. Jessica shot back. Because every emergency you described kept changing details. Because I couldn't figure out why Brown was supposedly so selfish when I could see how much stress these family crises were causing him. You had no right, I had every right, Jessica said firmly. Someone in this family needed to figure out what was really going on. And now we know. Now we all know exactly what you think of the son who's been keeping this family afloat. My father, who had been silent through most of this exchange, finally stood up. His face was gray, and he looked older than his 62 years. Margaret, he said quietly, this has to stop. This whole thing, the gambling, the lying, the manipulation, it has to stop right now. Don't you start with me too, Robert, she snapped. I should have stopped it months ago, he said. I should have told Brown the truth about where his money was going. I should have gotten you help instead of enabling this behavior. Enabling, she repeated incredulously. Yes, enabling. Every time you came home from the casino, crying about your losses, I comforted you instead of confronting you. Every time you cooked up another emergency to get money from Brown, I stayed quiet instead of stopping you. I've been just as guilty as you are. The admission seemed to take the last bit of fight out of my mother. She slumped back into her chair, finally understanding that she had no allies left in the room. But I wasn't done yet, because there was one more thing I needed to know. Mom, I said, I need you to answer one question honestly. Just one. Did you ever actually love me? Or have I just been an ATM to you for the past 4 years? The question hung in the air like a live wire. Everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting for her answer. When it came, it was quieter than anything else Shed said that day. Brown, of course I love you. You're my son. That's not what I asked, I said. I asked if you've ever actually loved me, or if you just love my bank account. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. And in that silence, I got my answer. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. My mother's inability to answer my question was more devastating than any of the lies or manipulation that had come before, because at the end of the day, this was what I'd always feared, that I was only valued for what I could provide, not for who I was as a person. Play the rest of the recording, I said to Jessica, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. Brown, maybe we don't need to, Tyler started. Play it, I insisted. I want everyone to hear exactly who they've been defending all these years. Jessica pressed play again, and my mother's voice filled the room once more. The best part is that Brown actually believes he's helping. The recording continued. He thinks he has this great son, this family hero. He has no idea that every dollar he sends goes straight to the casino. Last week alone, I lost $8,000 of his money at the slot machines, and then I called him crying about needing money for Jessica's car repairs. What car repairs? Jessica whispered, staring at my mother in horror. The recording kept playing. I tell him these elaborate stories about family emergencies, and he eats it up every single time. Of course, Mom, whatever the family needs. Has so pathetically desperate to be needed. Uncle Frank stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to the room. Aunt Patricia was covering her mouth with her hand, tears in her eyes. Even the children had stopped making noise, sensing that something terrible was happening in the adult world. Sometimes, I think about what would happen if he found out the truth. My mother's voice continued. But honestly, what's he going to do? Stop talking to his family? Hez too desperate for our approval. He needs us more than we need him. The cruelty of that last statement hit me like a physical blow. Shed known exactly what she was doing. Shed understood my psychological vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. The worst part was how accurate her assessment had been. Until today, I would have done anything to maintain my relationship with my family, even if it meant bankrupting myself in the process. There's more, Jessica said quietly, looking at me with tears in her eyes. Play it all, I said. I want to hear everything. I've got him convinced that the rest of the family thinks he's selfish and arrogant. The recording continued. Every time I call him for money, I tell him how disappointed everyone is in him, how they all think he's forgotten where he came from. The truth is, I never tell them about the money at all. I let them think he's actually as selfish as I pretend he is. That way, he stays isolated and dependent on my approval. Marcus was shaking his head slowly, his face pale. Mom, do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what you've put him through? But my mother wasn't looking at Marcus. She was staring at the table, her hands clenched into fists. When the recording finally ended, she looked up with an expression I'd never seen before. Not shame, not remorse, but something closer to hatred. Are you happy now? She asked me. Are you satisfied? You've humiliated me in front of the entire family, destroyed Christmas, and turned everyone against me. Is this what you wanted? The question was so absurd that I actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. What I wanted, Mom, was a mother who loved me. What I wanted was a family that valued me for more than my bank account. What I wanted was honesty instead of lies, gratitude instead of guilt trips, and some basic respect for the sacrifices I was making. Sacrifices, she spat. You live in a luxury condo and drive a BMW. What sacrifices have you made? I've been living like a college student for 4 years. I said, my voice rising. I've been eating ramen noodles and sleeping on a mattress on the floor so I could afford to support this family. I haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I haven't bought new clothes in 18 months. I've been putting off proposing to the woman I love because I spent the money I'd saved for her ring on your fake emergencies. Sarah squeezed my hand tighter, and I could see tears in her eyes. I've been working 60-hour weeks and taking on freelance projects to make extra money for the family emergency fund, I continued. I've been lying awake at night worrying about how I was going to cover the next crisis. I've been carrying the weight of this entire family's financial stability on my shoulders, and you've been throwing it all away on slot machines while laughing about how stupid I am. I never said you were stupid, she protested weakly. You said I was pathetically desperate, I replied. You said I was so desperate for approval that I'd never stop giving you money no matter how badly you treated me. And you know what the worst part is? You were right. Until today, you were absolutely right. I turned to look at my father, who was sitting with his head in his hands. Dad, how long have you known about the gambling? He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. About 18 months. I found casino receipts in her purse, found withdrawals on the bank statements. When I confronted her, she promised she'd stop. But she didn't stop. She got better at hiding it. He said quietly. Started using cash. Started going to different casinos. I didn't know about the money from you until a few months ago. Why didn't you tell me? My father's face crumpled. Because I was ashamed. Because I was afraid you'd blame me for not stopping her. Because she threatened to leave me if I said anything to the family. The pieces were falling into place now. My father's increasing stress over the past year. His reluctance to participate in the phone calls asking for money. His obvious discomfort during family gatherings. Had been trapped between his loyalty to his wife and his love for his son. She threatened divorce if you told the truth, I asked. He nodded. She said if I exposed her gambling problem, she'd take half of everything and disappear. She said she'd make sure I never saw the grandchildren again. What grandchildren? Tyler asked bitterly. Jessica's kids live in California. Marcus doesn't have children. I don't have children. Brown doesn't have children because he's been too busy supporting Mom's gambling addiction to start his own family. The truth of that statement hit everyone in the room. I was 28 years old, in a serious relationship with an amazing woman, and instead of building my own future, I'd been pouring my resources into a bottomless pit of lies and manipulation. Furthermore, Jessica said, her voice shaking with anger. Mom, you've poisoned our relationships with Brown for years. You made us all believe he was selfish and didn't care about the family. I've been resenting him for months, thinking he was too good for us now that he was successful. So have I, Marcus admitted. Man, Brown, I'm so sorry. I thought you'd turned into some kind of snob who looked down on the rest of us. I never looked down on anyone, I said. I've been killing myself trying to prove that success hadn't changed me, that I was still the same person who cared about this family. And while you were doing that, Tyler said, looking at our mother with disgust, she was making sure we all thought you'd abandoned us emotionally. She played both sides perfectly. Grandmother Rose, who had been listening to all of this with increasing alarm, finally spoke again. Margaret, I want you to understand something. This behavior stops today. Not next week. Not next month. Today, you're going to get professional help for your gambling addiction. And you're going to figure out a way to make amends to your son. I don't have a gambling addiction, my mother said stubbornly. Yes, you do, my father said firmly. And I'm done pretending otherwise. Margaret, I'm freezing our joint bank accounts tomorrow morning. I'm removing you from all the credit cards. And if you don't get into treatment immediately, I'm filing for divorce. The threat of divorce seemed to break through my mother's defiance in a way that nothing else had. Her face went white again, and for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. Robert, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, he said. I've watched you destroy our son's trust, manipulate our entire family, and throw away every penny we've ever saved. I've enabled this behavior for too long, and it ends now. But where will I go? What will I do? That depends on whether you choose to get help or choose to keep gambling, he said simply. But either way, you won't be using our family as a bank for your addiction anymore. I looked around the table at faces that ranged from supportive to heartbroken to furious. The family dynamics that had controlled my life for the past 4 years were disintegrating in real time. And for the first time since this whole confrontation began, I felt something that surprised me. I felt relief, but my mother wasn't done fighting yet. I could see the wheels turning in her head, could see her looking for one last angle to play, one final manipulation that might salvage her position. And when she found it, her target was the one person in the room she thought she could still control. She turned to Tyler with tears in her eyes and a trembling voice. "Tyler, sweetheart, you understand, don't you? You know I love you children more than anything. I made some mistakes, but everything I did was because I was trying to take care of this family. You won't abandon your mother, will you?" The moment my mother turned her manipulative focus to Tyler, something inside me snapped. I'd watched her psychologically abuse me for years, had endured her lies and guilt trips, but seeing her try to drag my youngest brother into her web of manipulation was a line I wouldn't let her cross. "Don't," I said, my voice cutting through her fake tears like a knife. "Don't you dare try to manipulate Tyler the same way you manipulated me." But Tyler surprised everyone in the room. Instead of falling for the emotional manipulation, he looked at our mother with a clarity that belied his 24 years. "Mom," he said quietly, "I love you. But Brown is right. I can't be part of this anymore." The rejection hit her like a physical blow. Tyler had always been her favorite, the baby of the family who could do no wrong in her eyes. If Shed lost Tyler's support, Shed lost everything. I stood up again, but this time it wasn't in anger. This time, I felt calm, focused, and completely in control for the first time in years. "I want everyone in this room to understand something," I said, looking around the table. "This conversation has been painful, but it's also been necessary. For 4 years, I've been living my life based on lies. I've been making financial decisions based on emergencies that didn't exist. I've been feeling guilty about my success because I believed it had isolated me from the people I loved most. I turned to look directly at my mother, but more than that, I've been allowing myself to be emotionally abused because I was desperate for approval from someone who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. And that ends today." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app again. But this time, I was looking at my account settings rather than my transaction history. "Mom, I'm canceling the standing transfer that puts $500 into your account every month for Dad's retirement supplement. I'm also removing you from my emergency contact list at the bank, which means you'll no longer be able to call them claiming to be helping me with a family emergency." Her eyes went wide. "Brown, you can't be serious. Your father needs that money to retire." "My father will be fine," I said calmly. "Dad, I'm going to set up a separate account that only you have access to. It'll continue to help with your retirement, but only if you get counseling to address the codependency issues that allowed this situation to continue for so long." My father nodded, tears in his eyes. "Son, that's more than fair. And you're right about the counseling. I should have protected you from this. Furthermore," I continued, "I've been documenting every financial request, every supposed emergency, and every phone call for the past year. I have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges for fraud if I choose to." The threat wasn't empty, and everyone in the room knew it. What my mother had done wasn't just morally wrong. It was illegal. Shed obtained money through false pretenses, which constituted fraud under Massachusetts law. "You wouldn't," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "I don't want to," I said honestly. "But I will if you try to continue this pattern of behavior with Tyler or Jessica or anyone else in this family. And I'll also pursue legal action if you try to contact my employer, my friends, or Sarah's family with lies about me." Jessica was nodding approvingly. "Brown's being more than generous, Mom. Hez giving you a chance to get help and make amends instead of just pressing charges immediately." "What's your plan, son?" Uncle Frank asked. "Because it's clear you've thought this through." I had thought it through, actually. During the past year, as the financial requests had become more frequent and less believable, I'd started researching my options. I'd consulted with a lawyer, had documented everything meticulously, and had prepared for this conversation, even though I'd hoped it would never be necessary. "I'm moving," I said simply. "My company has been trying to get me to transfer to their Seattle office for 8 months. The pay is better, the cost of living is lower, and it'll be far enough away that emergency phone calls won't result in immediate financial transfers. The announcement sent another shockwave through the room. Sarah's face lit up with surprise and joy. She'd been encouraging me to take the Seattle position for months. When? Tyler asked. I'm accepting the transfer tomorrow morning. Sarah and I will be moving in 6 weeks. I turned to look at my girlfriend, who was beaming despite the tears in her eyes. Sarah, I know this isn't the romantic proposal you deserved, and I'm sorry for that. But I want everyone in this room to know that the reason I haven't proposed yet isn't because I don't love you or don't want to marry you. It's because I've been using the money I'd saved for your engagement ring to fund my mother's gambling addiction. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah reached over and took my hand. Brown, she said softly. I've known about the ring fund since last Christmas. I've been waiting because I could see how much stress you were under with these family emergencies. I thought you were dealing with legitimate family problems and putting our future on hold to help people you loved. You knew about the ring. I saw the jewelry store receipts in your desk when I was looking for a pen, she said with a small smile. I've been patiently waiting for you to figure out how to balance your family obligations with our relationship. Now I know there were never any real obligations to balance. The revelation that Sarah had known about my proposal plans all along was almost overwhelming. She'd been supporting me through what she thought were genuine family crises, never once complaining about the delays or the financial strain. I'm sorry, I said to her. I'm sorry you've been caught up in this mess. I'm sorry your introduction to my family has been this disaster. And I'm sorry I let someone else's manipulation affect our relationship. Don't apologize, she said firmly. You were trying to help people you loved. That's one of the things I love most about you. The fact that your trust was betrayed isn't your fault. I turned back to the table, where my mother was looking increasingly desperate. She'd played every card in her deck and found them all worthless. Mom, I want you to understand something clearly, I said. This isn't about punishing you or getting revenge. This is about protecting myself and protecting the rest of the family from further manipulation. You have a serious problem that requires professional help, and until you get that help, I can't have a relationship with you. But I'm your mother, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, you are, and that's what makes this so heartbreaking. A mother is supposed to protect her children, not exploit them. A mother is supposed to build up her children's confidence, not tear it down for personal gain. A mother is supposed to love unconditionally, not use love as a tool for manipulation. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of everything I'd just said. If you get help, if you address the gambling addiction and the underlying issues that led to this behavior, then we can talk about rebuilding our relationship, I continued. But it will be on my terms, with my boundaries, and with complete honesty from this point forward. Grandmother Rose had been listening to this entire exchange with growing approval. Now she spoke up again. Brown, you're handling this with more maturity and grace than most people twice your age would show. But I want you to know that you're not alone in this. This family is going to support you, and we're going to make sure Margaret gets the help she needs. She turned to my mother with steel in her voice. Margaret, I'm changing my will. The inheritance I'd planned to leave you will instead be placed in a trust fund for Tyler's graduate education and Brown's future children. You'll receive a small monthly allowance if and only if you remain in treatment and gambling free for at least 2 years. The financial consequences were clearly hitting my mother harder than the emotional ones. She was beginning to understand that her behavior hadn't just cost her my trust. It had cost her the respect and support of the entire extended family. But I could see in her eyes that she still wasn't ready to accept responsibility. She was angry, desperate, and looking for someone to blame. And I had a feeling she was about to make one final attempt to manipulate the situation. When it came, it was even more desperate and pathetic than I'd expected. My mother's final attempt at manipulation came 3 days after Christmas dinner, and it was so predictably desperate that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I was at work on Thursday morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number, which I'd been expecting. What I hadn't expected was the background noise. Sirens, urgent voices, what sounded like a hospital emergency room. Brown, she said, her voice weak and shaky. I need you to come to Mass General right away. I'm having chest pains, and the doctors say it might be my heart. I don't want to die with things between us like this. 6 months ago, that phone call would have sent me into a panic. I would have dropped everything, rushed to the hospital, and probably written a check for whatever medical expenses weren't covered by insurance. But this time, I felt nothing but cold clarity. "Mom," I said calmly, "I'm going to call 911 and request a welfare check. If you're really having a medical emergency, they'll take care of you." "What?" "Brown." "No. I need you to." I hung up and immediately dialed 911. "This is Brown Henderson," I told the dispatcher. "I'd like to request a welfare check on Margaret Henderson at Mass General Hospital. She just called claiming to have chest pains. But based on recent events, I believe she may be fabricating a medical emergency." The dispatcher was professional and thorough. She took down all the relevant information, including my mother's history of manipulation and fraud. 20 minutes later, she called me back. "Mr. Henderson, we've checked with Mass General Hospital. There is no Margaret Henderson currently registered as a patient, nor has there been one admitted today. We also checked with emergency services, and no ambulance has picked up anyone by that name from your mother's address." I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. Even after everything that had happened at Christmas dinner, even after being exposed and confronted by the entire family, she was still trying to run the same playbook. I called my father immediately. "Dad, where is Mom right now?" "Shay's at the kitchen table having coffee," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "Why?" "She just called me claiming to be at Mass General with chest pains." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Robert?" I heard my mother's voice in the background. "Who's on the phone?" "It's Brown," my father said, his voice cold. "He says you called him claiming to be at the hospital with chest pains." "I never said I was at the hospital." I heard her protest. "I said I was having chest pains and might need to go to the hospital." Even caught in an obvious lie, she was still trying to parse her words to create wiggle room. The audacity was breathtaking. "Dad," I said, "I need you to understand something. This is exactly what I've been dealing with for 4 years. The fake emergencies, the emotional manipulation, the complete disregard for the truth. This is why I can't have a relationship with her anymore." "I understand, son," he said quietly, "and am done enabling it. Margaret, pack a bag. You're going to stay with your sister until you get into treatment." I could hear an argument starting in the background, but my father's voice cut through it with authority I hadn't heard from him in years. "This isn't a discussion, Margaret. You just tried to manipulate our son with a fake medical emergency 3 days after promising the entire family that you were done lying. You clearly can't control yourself, so someone else is going to control the situation for you." Later that day, Jessica called me with an update. "Brown, I wanted you to know that Dad drove Mom to Aunt Carol's house in Springfield. Aunt Carol knows everything now, and she's agreed to supervise Mom until Dad can get her into a gambling addiction treatment program." "How did Dad manage that?" "Last time I checked, Mom was refusing to admit she had a problem." "Ultimatum," Jessica said simply. "Treatment or divorce." And this time, he meant it. Hess already contacted a lawyer. The speed with which everything was changing was almost dizzying. For years, the family dynamics had seemed set in stone, immutable patterns that had controlled all of our relationships. Now, within a week of the truth coming out, everything was shifting. "How's Tyler handling all this?" I asked. "Better than I expected, actually. I think he's relieved that someone finally said what needed to be said. He told me yesterday that he's been walking on eggshells around Mom for years, never knowing what would set off her mood swings." That evening, Tyler called me directly. "Brown, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Yes, I do. I believed her lies about you. I thought you'd become this arrogant, selfish person who didn't care about the family anymore. I resented you for your success, and I'm ashamed of that now." The conversation with Tyler was healing in a way I hadn't expected. For years, I'd felt isolated from my siblings, believing that my success had created distance between us. Now I understood that the distance had been artificially manufactured by our mother to keep me emotionally vulnerable and financially compliant. "Tyler," I said, "I want you to know that my offer to help with your graduate school is still standing. But this time, The money will go directly to the school, not through Mom or Dad. I appreciate that. But I want to pay my own way, he said. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realize I need to build my own independence. I don't want to be financially dependent on family members, even family members who have good intentions. The maturity of his response impressed me. Tyler was choosing to learn from this situation rather than simply switch his dependency from our mother to me. Over the next few days, the rest of the extended family reached out. Uncle Frank called to apologize for not questioning the financial requests earlier. Aunt Patricia sent a long email expressing her support and admiration for how Ed handled the situation. Even Grandmother Rose called to tell me she was proud of me for standing up for myself. But the most meaningful conversation came from my father. Son, he said during a phone call on Sunday evening. I need to tell you something. I've been a coward. I knew what your mother was doing to you, and I stood by and let it happen because I was afraid of confronting her. Dad, you were in an impossible situation. No, I wasn't. I was in a difficult situation, and I chose the easy path instead of the right path. I chose to protect my marriage instead of protecting my son, and that was wrong. The admission meant more to me than he could possibly know. For years, I'd wondered why my father seemed so distant during the family financial crises. Now I understood that his distance had been guilt and shame, not indifference. I'm proud of you for standing up to her, he continued. I'm proud of you for refusing to be manipulated anymore. And am sorry it took me so long to find the courage to do the same thing. 2 weeks after Christmas dinner, I got a call from a counselor at a gambling addiction treatment center in Springfield. Mr. Henderson, I'm calling to let you know that your mother has begun treatment with our program. Part of her treatment plan involves making amends to the people her addiction has harmed. She'd like to write you a letter of apology. I'm not ready for that yet, I said immediately. I understand completely, the counselor said. Recovery is a long process, and rebuilding trust takes even longer. I just wanted you to know that she's engaged with the program and seems to be taking it seriously. It was progress, but I wasn't ready to get my hopes up yet. I'd learned the hard way that my mother was capable of extraordinary deception when it served her purposes. The real test would come in 6 months, or a year, or 2 years down the line. The real test would be whether she could maintain her recovery when the spotlight of family attention had moved on to other things. But for the first time in years, that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd done my part by setting boundaries and refusing to enable destructive behavior. The rest was up to her. Meanwhile, my own life was finally moving forward. Sarah and I had started looking at apartments in Seattle. I'd officially accepted the transfer and would be starting my new position in 4 weeks. Most importantly, I'd taken the money I'd been saving for family emergencies and bought an engagement ring. I was finally ready to build my own future, instead of trying to fix someone else's past. 6 months after that Christmas dinner that changed everything, I was standing on the observation deck of the Space Needle in Seattle, looking out over Elliott Bay with Sarah's hand in mine. The engagement ring I'd bought her 3 months earlier caught the late afternoon sunlight, sending little sparkles across her fingers as she pointed out landmarks in our new city. Look, she said, gesturing toward the water. You can see the ferry coming in from Bainbridge Island. Should we take a trip out there next weekend? Absolutely, I said, pulling her closer. I love that we can actually make plans now without worrying about emergency phone calls disrupting everything. The difference in our life since moving to Seattle was remarkable. For the first time in 4 years, I was living within my actual means, instead of constantly preparing for the next family crisis. We'd been able to furnish our apartment properly, take weekend trips, and even start saving for a real vacation. More importantly, I'd been able to be fully present in our relationship instead of always being distracted by guilt and financial stress. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. He was finishing his senior year of college and had been accepted to graduate programs at 3 different universities. More importantly, he was paying his own way through school with scholarships, student loans, and a part-time job. Had chosen independence over dependence, and it was making him stronger. Brown, the text read. Just wanted to let you know that Mom completed her 90-day treatment program. She's been gambling free for 4 months now and is working part-time at a bookstore. Dad says she's like a different person. No pressure, but she'd still like to write you that letter if you're ever ready. I showed the message to Sarah, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "How do you feel about that?" she asked. "Hopeful but cautious," I said honestly. 4 months is a good start, but it's still early. Recovery from any addiction takes years, not months, and even if she maintains her sobriety, rebuilding trust is going to take even longer. What would it take for you to be willing to have a relationship with her again? It was a question I'd been thinking about for months. In therapy sessions with the counselor I'd started seeing after the Christmas confrontation, Wed talked extensively about forgiveness, boundaries, and what healthy relationships looked like. "Consistency," I said after a moment. "Not just staying away from gambling, but demonstrating that she understands the impact her behavior had on everyone around her. Real accountability, not just apologies when she wants something." Sarah nodded. "And what about the financial stuff? Would you ever be willing to help the family again?" "I'm already helping," I said. "I send Dad $500 a month directly into his retirement account. I've offered to pay for Tyler's graduate school tuition if he needs help, and I've told Jessica that if she ever has a real emergency, she can call me directly instead of going through Mom." The difference was that now these financial decisions were made from a position of strength rather than manipulation. I helped because I chose to, not because I felt guilty or obligated. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jessica calling from California. "Brown, I have news. Remember how I said I was thinking about applying to law school?" "Yeah, what did you decide?" "I got in. UC Davis accepted me into their evening program. I can keep working while I get my degree." "Jess, that's fantastic. I'm so proud of you." "There's more," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I've been thinking about specializing in elder abuse and financial exploitation. What happened with Mom opened my eyes to how common these patterns are, especially when families don't talk openly about money." The irony wasn't lost on me. Our family's crisis had not only freed me from years of manipulation but had also inspired Jessica to pursue a career helping other families avoid similar situations. "That's amazing," I said. "You're going to help so many people." After I hung up, Sarah and I walked down to Pike Place Market, where Wed planned to have dinner. As we wandered through the vendors and street performers, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The family I'd grown up in had been built on secrets, manipulation, and financial exploitation disguised as love. The family I was part of now was built on honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. It was smaller now. Mom's treatment and Dad's new boundaries had fractured some of the old connections, but it was infinitely healthier. Dad had started dating again for the first time since his separation from Mom, had joined a support group for families of addicts, and was learning how to maintain relationships without enabling destructive behavior. He seemed younger somehow, less burdened by the weight of secrets and lies. Tyler had blossomed in the absence of Mom's emotional manipulation. Had started a small business tutoring other students in mathematics, and was talking about pursuing a PhD in education policy. Most importantly, Had learned to set boundaries and trust his own judgment, instead of constantly seeking approval from others. Even my relationship with Marcus had improved. Had reached out a few months ago to apologize for resenting my success and to ask for advice about his own career. Wed had several long conversations about family dynamics, personal growth, and what it meant to support each other without creating dependency. As Sarah and I shared a seafood platter overlooking the water, I thought about the life lesson that had emerged from all this pain and chaos. It wasn't just about recognizing manipulation or setting boundaries, though those things were important. It was about understanding that love and financial obligation are not the same thing. Real love doesn't come with a price tag or a payment plan. Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your own well-being to prove your worth. Real love doesn't use guilt as a weapon or exploit your desire to help others. Real love builds you up instead of tearing you down. It encourages your growth instead of stunting it. It celebrates your success instead of resenting it. And it respects your boundaries instead of constantly testing them. The relationship I had with Sarah was real love. The relationships I was rebuilding with Tyler, Jessica, and my father were real love. Even the conditional relationship I might someday have with my mother, if she continued her recovery, could potentially become real love. But it would take time, patience, and a commitment to honesty that my family had never practiced before. "You're thinking deep thoughts," Sarah said, interrupting my reflection. "Just grateful," I said simply. "Grateful that I finally learned the difference between being loved and being used. She smiled and raised her wine glass. Harry's to new beginnings and honest relationships. And to never again confusing financial exploitation with family loyalty, I added. As we clinked glasses, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The future was uncertain. My mother's recovery wasn't guaranteed, and rebuilding family trust would be a long process. But for the first time in my adult life, I was living according to my own values, instead of someone else's manipulation. I was free, and that freedom had been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of confrontation, every boundary it had to draw, because at the end of the day, the most loving thing it'd done for my family was refusing to enable destructive behavior, and the most loving thing it'd done for myself was finally recognizing my own worth. The Christmas dinner confrontation that had felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something much better. It had been the beginning of honest relationships, healthy boundaries, and a life built on genuine love instead of financial obligation. It had been the beginning of real family. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone you loved was taking advantage of your generosity or good nature? How did you handle it? And what did you learn about setting boundaries in relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others who might be going through similar family dynamics find this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming manipulation, setting healthy boundaries, and finding the courage to stand up for yourself. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear the message that love shouldn't come with a price tag. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. I hope it helps you recognize your own worth and find the strength to demand the respect you deserve in all your relationships. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's destructive behavior. Even when that person is family, take care of yourselves, set those boundaries, and never forget that you deserve relationships built on genuine love and respect.